Welcome to this week's edition of Three Men and a Movie. Today we split ways and went to enjoy our own films without each other. I watched The Greatest Showman, and you watched
Darkest Hour.
Darkest Hour. So, two films that definitely played a role in the recent Golden Globes, and two films we're going to let you know whether or not you should take the time to see this weekend. So, what do you think of Darkest Hour?
Okay, Darkest Hour. I'm recommending it very strongly, although you will not find it in every theater. And usually there's little clues that let you know whether a film is making an attempt for an Oscar or some kind of award. And Darkest Hour definitely is. It's very self-aware. Therefore, it's on limited release. So you'll find it in little corners, little pockets of your city. But it's worth it. I say pay for it. And actually, I say pay for it a couple of times. And there's even like a whole wine and cheese or wine and an entree pairing where you can pair Darkest Hour and then watch Dunkirk right after it. So I'll get into the details a little bit later, but really, really good film. Gary Oldman actually won the Golden Globe, since you mentioned that, for his portrayal of Winston Churchill. And some points throughout the movie, you forget that it's actually Gary Oldman, who, by the way, is one of my favorite actors, top two. I'll tell you who the other one is later. Hans?
The Greatest Showman, I definitely would say pay for it. And this was one of those weird things where, Rotten Tomatoes is giving it like a 53%, but the audience score is 90%. And I definitely agree with the audience score. I have no idea what the critics were looking for in this one. First of all, I think it lends itself really well to a musical, just with the circus theme. The musical action is great. The musical score is great. The choreography within the movie is phenomenal. It keeps you enticed and engaged throughout the entire film. Has a great storyline that kind of mixes in kind of the racial feelings at the time, interracial couples, how that was viewed, feelings about trying to live up to what your parents expect of you, and what you expect of yourself. And, this one really hit home for me personally, because the entire theme of the movie ends up being like, what is enough in life? Like, is it enough to have a happy family life? Or do you need to create so much more? And, that's something I'm always asking myself, like, is what I'm doing enough? Like, yeah. I feel I'm capable of so much more, but at what sacrifice is it worth it? And so that's kind of the overarching theme that I really hit home with me personally, and that they really nailed throughout the entire film really well.
Yeah, and the color scheme, from what I saw in the trailers, I haven't seen the movie, but it's one of those that's on my list. The color scheme looks great. Like, there's some very dark colors, and then, pow, there's a red and an orange kind of popping out of the screen, which, at least for me in the trailer, it gives me the effect and the feeling and the mood that there are certain parts of the circus life and the show business life that are a little darker, and it's your obscure behind the scenes kind of thing that we don't really get to see as an audience. And then there's the show that we all enjoy. I don't know if that kind of plays a part or if it's just me reaching.
Well, what I found really interesting was, like, can you imagine life without the circus? I mean, it's just so kind of ingrained in our life of having grown up with it, that there was a time when there was no circus. And he thought all of these things up and thought of all of these interesting acts to try to bring people in. And it's just crazy that wasn't thought of before that, That's, and it goes into detail about kind of excluding people that are different and how we react towards people that aren't the norm and aren't the high class and low class, and I don't know, touched a lot of points all in one film. It did a phenomenal job.
So that Zac Efron is in it, and he's so hot.
Apparently that's my wife's boy crush, she told me.
That's not the first one you mentioned.
I guess Mark Wahlberg's her man crush. And Zac Efron is her boy crush.
I see.
How old is Zac Efron?
He's probably like in his 30s. He's probably older than you are. But he looks like a boy.
I guess.
He does. He does. Okay, that's cool.
How old is that?
Just leave it alone, man. You're going to torture yourself. Like, he's 54 and he looks the way that just... What is Zac Efron's body fat percent like? 3%.
Damn it!
And he's held it since infancy. Like, all right, enough. So back to Darkest Hour, because I have a few things that I want to say. Like I mentioned earlier, Gary Oldman is top 2. And he won a Golden Globe, which he'd never won before. And I found that very surprising. After watching the film, I'm like, wow, he's such a great actor. He must have won Best Actor for something. And he's been nominated quite a few times, but hasn't really taken all those awards home. And I thought, well, let's just see, all this information is accessible to us. And Daniel Day-Lewis is my other top 2 favorites. And he's been in some categories against Daniel Day-Lewis and lost to him a couple of times. So I found that pretty interesting. And Daniel Day-Lewis is in a film called Phantom Thread, but that I'm also going to go see. But this one really drew my attention because Winston Churchill is a historical figure that we all have some sort of story about, or maybe in a history class we heard about him, or in our involvement in the United States into World War II, there was some connection to him, and his conversations with our president at the time. So we have some sort of information or background information that we can tap into for the film. Yet, going into the film, you find out so many historical points that we did not know and were not aware of. Unless you're English, you don't know about that kind of stuff, right? I'll give you some details without spoiling things, but he wasn't initially in his role as prime minister. Initially, he was not well liked. Matter of fact, he was actually on the verge of being replaced very quickly after he came into office, which I found surprising. When I think of Winston Churchill, he's this huge historical figure that everyone looks up to in terms of leadership and government, and his people were not necessarily backing him until a few things occurred that really made people feel like, okay, this is our leader and he is our prime minister. And also mentioning Dunkirk, he was responsible for that whole operation that, if you haven't seen Dunkirk, I won't spoil it either, because like I said, you should pair him up, but he was responsible for calling out all civilian ships like they did in Dunkirk. So it was really good. One thing that I noticed throughout the film, in terms of makeup, there's no CGI here. It's all just makeup. He spent hours and hours on the makeup chair, and we talked about that when we talked about Bright. But in this case, he still has to look like a human being. So that's so much more difficult, I feel. And it's seamless on film. You can't really tell where Gary Oldman ends and Winston Churchill begins. I forgot a few times, and this is one of my favorite actors. I went to see it because of him. And they put prosthetics on his feet. The bottom of his feet looked like a fat old man's foot. And this is Gary Oldman. He's still a pretty, your wife has Zac Efron.
When is Winston Churchill barefoot?
Well, they go into his life, and so they show him that he's kind of a drinker, and he's kind of a smoker, and he's kind of a lazy. He's kind of a lazy guy at home anyway. He spends a lot of time in bed, and he's like his speeches and stuff. His assistants are writing them for him while he drinks and smokes cigars in bed in a bathrobe.
He's living the life.
Yeah, yeah. So he was kind of perceived as this weird kind of crazy guy who was unstable in a lot of ways because of the things that I just mentioned too. So in those scenes, they show his feet.
Gotcha.
I saw his feet. I'm thinking those are not Gary Oldman's feet. There's no way. There's no way. So very good film. I highly recommend it. It's definitely going to be on the Oscar radar, and the nominations come out in a couple of weeks. So we'll obviously be doing a follow-up on that. But it was definitely on the Golden Globes radar, and so was The Greatest Showman, right? What was it nominated?
Hugh Jackman was nominated for Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical. And the song, I believe it's called This Is Me, was nominated for Best Original Song in a Movie.
Yeah. But it's funny that you mentioned that. Then the critics didn't quite like it, which is sort of hypocritical in a way.
Yeah, that's what I was like, what the heck? Are they bipolar?
There's got to be something to that.
We don't like it, but let's nominate it.
Yeah, that's very, very, very strange. Although there's a certain type of film, I think, that usually makes it into the radar of the people in the Academy. Like, this is an award-winning type of film, and this is not. But I would assume that Great Showman would be one of those.
Hugh Jackman portrayed Barnum very well. Portrayed the struggle, like the internal struggles he was going through throughout his life. Just did a phenomenal job. Michelle Williams played his wife and really tied us into that role really well, where we're feeling her pain and anguish as he's going through everything that he's going through. And Zendaya as the
love interest,
the love interest of Zac Efron, and how they're viewed by people in that time frame as being a mixed race couple and or potential couple and things like that, and how his parents are handling that. I mean, they go into a lot of detail. It's all Zac Efron was phenomenal in it as well.
A Ken doll and a human being. That's a weird mix there. I can see how people can be opposed to it. Just like you guys. I mean, it's tough enough for us to watch one movie a week,
right?
Yeah. So
I'm quitting my day job.
Yeah. Guys, start, getting your friends to subscribe so that we can keep getting paid for this, and that way we can quit our jobs and just do this for you all the time.
It sounds like a great program.
Yeah. We'll shoot 5, 10 episodes.
Watch movies all day?
Yeah.
And then talk about them?
Yeah.
And get paid for it?
Yeah.
Sign us up.
You guys don't know, this is really hard work. So with that, we're going to say this has been another episode of 3 Men
and a Movie.